Welcome to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio, bringing you insights and strategies to help you create a magnificent and fulfilling second half of life. Here's your host, certified professional retirement coach and best-selling author, Dr. Dorian Mintzer.
I want to welcome everybody to this month's Revolutionize Your Retirement Interviews with Expert series. I'm Dorian Mintzer, owner of Revolutionize Retirement and your host. So the topic today is the spirituality of age. And it's based on a book that's brand new, just came out this month actually, by Robert Weber, PhD, and Carol Orsborn, PhD. It's called The Spirituality of Age, A Seeker's Guide to Growing Older. And I can attest to it. It's a very powerful book. I totally recommend it. Not only do they share their journey, but they get you thinking about all of these questions about living and living more wholly, and that's part of what they're going to be talking about today. And it's a wonderful book. So without further ado, I think I want to just introduce both and we'll get ourselves going. Robert Weber, who I'm going to call Bob, if that's all right with you, Bob. I actually had met Bob many years ago when our earlier work paths crossed. And then I've continued seeing him over the years, sometimes at spirituality meetings or conferences, and then also through the Life Planning Network. He's the recipient of the American Society on Aging's 2014 Religion, Spirituality, and Aging Award. He's assistant professor of psychology part-time at Harvard Medical School and a former Jesuit. He also serves as a faculty member of Mass General Hospital, Department of Psychiatry. He lives in Cambridge, Mass., where he has a psychological practice. Carol Orsborn, also a PhD, is somebody that I actually met also at the same conference where Bob and Carol met, which was the 2011 American Society on Aging. She's founder and editor-in-chief of Fierce with Age, the digest of boomer wisdom, inspiration, and spirituality. She's the author of more than 20 books for and about the boomer generation, as well as popular blogs on Huffington Post, PBS Next Avenue, and BeliefNet.com. She has a doctorate in the history and criticism of religion, has served on the faculties of Georgetown University and Loyola, can't say it right, Loyola, you say it, Carol.
Loyola.
Marymount University. That was a bit of a tongue twister for me for some reason. And she lives in Madison, Tennessee. I am so delighted to have both of you here. And there's so many directions we can go in, and hopefully we will. But I thought it might be great to start. You're both experts and pioneers really in this whole aging movement. And all of us are on this journey ourselves. And it's clear from who you are and the work you've done and the book, as people read the book, that you are also seekers. So why don't you start with just how you got interested in the subject and decided to collaborate with each other, and then we'll go into some other areas.
Okay, wonderful. May I, just before we answer that, may I just ask a question to the group? Because I think it's really good when they're super fresh to have this kind of quiz, and at the end I'm going to give them the answer. So hopefully they'll be intrigued, and they'll stay to the very end.
Great.
And that is, if you were walking through a park in your neighborhood and you saw an old woman sitting there, could be a man, but in this case, let's just say it's an old woman sitting there staring blankly off into a space, would you, A, first of all, not notice her at all or not see her at all? Would you, B, feel sorry for her and perhaps have a sense of dread about your own life? Would you, C, just wish you would get off the darn park bench and start an aerobics class and get a makeover? Or D. So D is what we're talking about today, and I'm not going to tell you what D is until the very end, but I think people will probably guess and gather as we go along. But I think most people who are, if they're really honest, when they take this assessment to themselves, it becomes very self-revealing about a number of the stereotypes that they may have inculcated into their own hearts, and some of the stereotypes are surprising. With that in mind, I'd like to Bob, why don't you go first? How did this book come to be?
That conference in March of 2011 was the starting point. I had just presented at the conference with a colleague. Interestingly enough, it was the American Society on Aging's conference, and a fellow named Rick Moody and I had just presented a talk on aging as a natural monastery. Aging as a natural monastery, a concept that was hatched by another friend and colleague, Jane Marie Thibault. And I had been thinking before I met Jane about the idea of contemplating your aging, looking for the deeper meaning in your aging, something more, something whole, something transcendent. So I arrived at this conference already thinking about things, and Carol had presented earlier in the day, and she came to our talk, Rick's and mine, and afterwards I'm heading downstairs, and lo and behold, on the landing between the first and second floors, I hear this voice saying, "Hello, thank you." I turned around, it was Carol. I had not met her before, nor had she met me in person. And we started a conversation on that landing. Now, we stayed there for an hour and a half on that landing, not moving, talking, exchanging ideas, and thinking about, we discovered that we each had been experiencing some things at this conference and felt that it was an important conference to be at for our personal as well as professional reasons. And I think we discovered that we had many questions in common. I guess you could say we discovered that we were seekers. Again, the subtitle of our book, A Seeker's Guide. And what is a seeker? And I would ask those of you listening in, you're here because you are seekers. You're seeking something. What is it you're seeking by coming to this presentation? What we seeking is a quest of a sort. And the same root for quest goes into question. We're seeking answers, aren't we? We're seeking answers to questions of great importance. When we're young, we have questions. When we're middle-aged, we have questions. And when we're old, we have questions. And we're looking for what's it all about, Alfie? We're trying to figure this out. So, yes, we are all seekers. And you mentioned, Dorian, that Carol and I are experts in aging, and I suspect there are a lot of other experts here as well. My definition of an expert is someone who knows when he or she does not know the answer, and there are many occasions for that. So seeking is being able to bear with the fact that you don't know the answer and that you live the question, deeply. And one of our mottos, I think, is that very idea, and we take it from a wonderful poet, Rainier Maria Rilke's book, Letters to a Young Poet, where a man questions Rilke, should I be a poet? Maybe the question here is, how can I deal with my aging? How can I deal with the dark and the light sides of my aging, the good things about getting older, the not so good things about getting older? And what we are trying to do is really encourage people, as we have encouraged one another and ourselves in the beginning, to live the questions. Rilke puts it very well. Live the questions until you live your way through to an answer, your answer. No one can give you the answer to your deepest and most profound questions. And Carol and I can't give Carol the answer to her deepest and most profound questions, nor can she give me the answer to mine. But we've learned.
You do try, Bob.
But I do try. I push it. I do try because I know, right?
So,
go ahead.
Mary was at that same conference, and I think the moment, when Bob describes us on the stairwell, those who are listening might not realize there are like thousands of people sweeping by. And what specifically happened is I did go to Bob as an expert after hearing him talk. I've been speaking about adult development myself, but I said to him, well, Bob, after hearing your talk about contemplating and aging as a monastery, I just don't know whether I should continue to play in the world, because here I am at the top of my skills and abilities. Do I owe it to the world to continue on this fast-paced, contributing, ambitious track I've been on? Or my heart is telling me I just want to pull back and nurture myself and find some freedom and some quiet time that I have never had before, and I feel guilty doing it. And I looked at Bob, and I expected him to give me the answer, and instead, you know what he said? He said, oh, me too. So that's what started that. Now, shall we just go on, or did you have a particular question?
Keep going on, and that's fine, and then I'll interject some questions from my own as well as...
Okay, I'd be interested to hear what your impressions of that particular year were. For us, it was a real turning point because we weren't identifying with any of the points of view, aside from Bob's and my own, that were being talked about at the American Society of Aging, which is our leading organization. And we just weren't identifying because it turns out that in the history of gerontology, first of all, there was, as you can probably imagine, something called disengagement theory. And that meant that it was okay that older people are declining and not being in the mainstream and just try to make them as comfortable as possible. So that was really the theory of aging that was happening when our parents, the World War II generation, were aging.
In your rocking chair.
Yeah, in your rocking chair, but depressed, but trying to make them comfortable, sliding away graciously. And prior to that, people were reviling aging. I happen to think that's still the dominant mode. It's just gone way underground. But the gerontologist said, no, we don't want to revile aging, and we also don't like the idea of people being disengaged. So we need to do this thing called activity theory. So activity theory is what sounds really good to a lot of us, and to Bob's in my ear was starting to sound like just another stereotype, because now with activity theory we're taught that unless you're active and moving and reinventing yourself and running constantly and creating your legacy and just doing all these exhausting things, you're not really fulfilling your potential. You are not aging successfully. The piece that Bob and I really felt was missing was, having been lifelong seekers, this notion of where does spirituality fit into that picture? And we've always wanted to meditate and to be quiet and to contemplate, and we always thought that there would be a place for that in older age, and yet now we're being told not cool. Bob and I started this conversation and started seeking out other people and did find that there's a rich underground of people who are exploring something else. So I'll turn it back to Bob. So, Bob, what is our book offering as an alternative?
I think I want to pick up on quality of what you just said. I think we spend our lives, most of our lives early on, being human doings. We are constantly in action because our sense of worth in the world seems to be determined by things like what we can do that's seen by others, what we have that's seen by others and creates a bit of envy or jealousy. And I've got this. And then we like it when people say good things about us. So we're motivated to be human doings in order to get that which bolsters us, gives us a sense of ego, gives us a sense of self-worth. However, those things tend to fade away over time. And I think what we're trying to do, what Carol and I are trying to do, is really promote people moving, transitioning from being human doings to being human beings. Aging sometimes forces that upon you because you can't do everything you used to do. I'm certainly very aware of that. But it's also quieted me. And I think what our alternative is entering into that space where you experience more of the depth of life, appreciation for what is happening in the moment, in the here, in the now. There's much talk about the now in so many different domains these days. But I think that's what we really are talking about. It's aging as a spiritual path. And seeing that in the experience of aging, where it is, again, the good, the bad, the ugly, whatever's happening, if you really are willing to ask the right questions and search for a deeper meaning, you will find in it the alternative. You will find that what's facing you is really a spiritual opportunity to see life differently. I think that's what we're trying to do, to get people to open their eyes, to see their life as an aging individual differently. You had something, Dory?
Yeah, no, I was just going to add with that it does, and I think you've accomplished the task amazingly, because in a sense what you're doing is you're turning on its head that notion that as we get older and we're confronted with loss and mortality and what's it all about, the spiritual path does offer an opportunity for there to be a positive attitude about growing older because it's deeper. And I wonder if you could speak a little, because it's a really important passage of thinking about aging, just as you were saying, Carol. It's not decline. It's not just how busy you can be, but it's the stopping and the being and the getting more in touch with the authentic you, I guess is what it is, to become more whole, as I said before.
Yes.
For those of us who have been seekers prior to now, and many of us, I don't know how many boomers we have in our audience. I happen to be in Berkeley for People's Park, so that places me in the time and the place. Yeah. We did all of these things in order to strip away our ego, in order to not identify with our identities, to become less materialistic, to strip away more of who we have, our facade and our persona. We did all that by meditating, fasting, going to the consciousness movement, retreats. We did all that. And if you take a look at Zen Buddhism, and if you take a look at the mystical aspects of Christianity and Judaism and virtually every religion, they're all trying to do the same thing. And it's so interesting because I now realize with older age coming upon me and not being able to get every job that I want and not being able to control everything in my life the way I used to and to power my way through things, I realized that stripping away of the ego that I sought so hard to happen to practice is now happening organically. I am sometimes kicking and screaming into spiritual growth, but if you open to yourself to it, you can transform from being a victim of all of the losses associated with aging, and you can actually start to experience not only as a path, as Bob said, but it's actually in and of itself can be a spiritual or even mystical experience. That's the kind of light that we're opening up on the world, and those are the kind of, our book is so full of other people of all eras and generations and cultures who are lighting the way for us. So a lot of what Bob and I do with each other and in the book is turn all of us onto this like rich underground of people who have experienced aging in this alternate way.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share what some of the Eastern and West... go ahead, Bob. I don't want to...
No, and I think you alluded to this earlier, too. We not only point to others like Rumi and Thomas Merton and de Chardin and Maimonides and the great... all the traditions, I think, are part of it. But we're also... Carol and I are really inviting you into our own experience. And again, an interesting co-authorship team, a man and a woman, mm-hmm. a Christian former Jesuit and a Jew, and a person who's a clinical psychologist and someone who's an academic person who knows about the history and criticism of religion.
Wait a second, wait. I need to stop you both. You both said that I'm an expert in the criticism of religion. I'm not a critic of religion. I'm sorry. I let Dory go. No, I can't let you go twice. People are going to walk away saying, oh, she's a critic of religion. I love religion. It's history and critical theory of religion.
Yes.
It's understanding. It's one thing if you're another thing if your co-author does it. It's understanding religion as a phenomenon, and I actually come from the place that, as Bob said before, when you become an expert, you want to strip away everything to find out where the questions still are, or the things that can't be answered. And I got my PhD specifically because I wanted to see if anybody could absolutely disprove religion. And when you come right down to it, there's always some sort of other thing. Some people might think of it as higher self. It doesn't necessarily have to be God. Like we were talking about Buddhism earlier, it can be a philosophy or a force or an experience of consciousness. I am a Jew, but I've studied everything, and I'm a cafeteria religion person. I love the mystical traditions, however they're packaged. So that's what I wanted to tell you is that I think that our theory about using aging as a spiritual experience will work for people of whatever religious orientation or spiritual orientation or no spiritual orientation, just someone who's asking those questions about deeper meaning.
I think every single person who's listening in and every of the one of the traditions we're talking about, in a sense, refract a vision of life that's different. Every one of them is unique. And why not avail yourself of the opportunity to see the vast array of perceptions of life? And I think that's part of the spiritual path, too, is really seeing that Buddhism offers a perspective on life that another tradition does not, or not believing offers a tradition as well. So I think there's room it's a very big can't. In fact, it's all-inclusive. Dora, you had something, though.
No, it ties in with it, and the two of you have such a wonderful synergy with each other that I want you to just keep going, too, but I do have a few things I want to throw in and ask, too. But I know in your writing, and you talk about the importance of embracing the shadow and the light of aging. And can each of you talk a little bit more about that, of what you mean by that, and does that help people open up? Does it make people more depressed, sadder? What's been your experience of that when one gets in touch with kind of the shadow and the light side of it?
All of the above. I think that you can't say that if you look at the shadow side of aging, you're not going to weep sometimes. You're not going to even verge on despair or discouragement or feeling disheartened. I think that's part of life. It can never be excluded. I think one of the great things about Erik Erikson's vision or model of human development is that in that final stage, he said, it's a case of ego integrity versus despair. And what is integrity? Integrity is integration. It's putting it all together. And I think that's part of my work in this area, for my own personal reasons as well as professional, has been to weave things together. My name, in fact, in German, translated Weber, means the weaver. And I've been trying to weave together psychology, spirituality, and aging for quite a few years now, because I think that's what it is. If I don't do that, if I don't weave it together, I will wind up despairing. And then I will also miss the opportunity to grow in wisdom. And that was the human strength, Erikson says, happens when you are able to navigate that conflict between ego integrity versus despair. So we really are inviting people to integrate in each in his or her own way the answers to these questions in light of their life's experience, so that they get a vision for themselves of how to live life to the full and not exclude the good, the bad, and the ugly, the light or the dark. You need chiaroscuro. Rembrandt needed chiaroscuro to really make his paintings fascinating and exquisite. The juxtaposition of light and dark. Carol, I know you have some thoughts about it as well.
I think the main thing is that the price of denying the shadow side. I don't know anybody that says, oh, goody, I'm having losses. I've lost my husband or a good friend or a body part. That would be insane to celebrate it. And none of us want to welcome those losses. We're talking about conscious aging here, and I'll just say right off the bat, the conscious aging is not for everybody. It takes a certain kind of braveness or humbleness or I don't know what. But the thing is that what's happened in our modern society, contemporary society, is that we are denying the shadow side entirely, and we're denying it by trying to hide it away. That really, it's wonderful when you hear people say 60 is the new 30, or that, oh, she's so young, she's young forever, all those kinds of forever young kind of compliments. What's really gone on in our public discourse is a denial of aging entirely. So what aging has become in public discourse is an extension of midlife. What we have is a midlife that goes on and on forever. And the problem with that is that if you ever decide that you want to explore the potentialities of aging as its own life stage with its own vitality and gifts, you are forced out of the public realm, and they want to put you into a facility which has gates or sight out of mind. So all the advertisements you see on television, when you see 60, 70, 80-year-olds, they're always doing yoga or hiking the top of mountains. And there's nothing wrong with aspiring to be active and healthy if that's what you want to do. But there's also something incredibly exquisite that is being lost in our society in terms of going through grief and dwelling on the losses as part of a passage into also understanding the fragileness of life and what it feels like to truly have joy. Because a lot of people are just spending a lot of energy and money in cosmetic surgery and drugs and all that kind of stuff, or working past when they really wish they had to be working, just staving off this horrifying thing. And so, again, what Bob and I have been doing for each other, we've gone through plenty of life stages in the last 3 years, challenges to ourselves and those we love. What we've been doing is trying to find out if God gave us old age, there has to be some value in it. There has to be some kind of inherent gift in it. And believe it or not, we are in the midst of tragedy and aspects of aging we personally wish we weren't having to deal with. We are having also at the same time unprecedented joy and these moments of transcendence and merger with the divine that are beyond anything I had ever previously imagined.
Yes, and let me just piggyback on that, Carol, that I was thinking maybe to communicate a sense of some of what I experience as the gifts, the spiritual gifts of facing the dark side. One of the things that gets shattered in us as we get older are all our illusions. We all walk around through life half asleep. We walk around through life being Cleopatra, queens of denial. And I think what has happened to me is the three grand illusions have gotten shattered. The first is immortality. When I was young, I was an athlete. You know, you got injured, yes, but you felt that you were never going to die. Truth is, I'm going to. So what's the gift in knowing that? What's the gift in knowing that? One of the gifts I got from my mother early on, which is, in the meantime, live. She said to me when I was fearful of death, she said, go out and play with your friends. Don't just get caught in the shadow and live there. And I've been doing that ever since. So one gift in facing mortality is that. Then there's invulnerability, another grand illusion. We are vulnerable. A year and a half ago, took a bad fall, walking my dog, hit black ice, tore my rotator cuff in 4 places. And what I discovered in the process was, as I had to face my own vulnerability, I began to be more open to that in others. I began actually to be more compassionate than I had been. So a second gift. The first one around immortality is living in the moment. The gift of the second was live compassionately. And the third one is total independence. Now, our culture promotes that. We're all supposed to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps, not need anybody. And I went through an early part of my life not wanting to need anybody. And what I've discovered as I have been able and willing to admit my own dependence on others, and actually think about it, we are dependent from the get-go. We are dependent when we're conceived and gestating in mama's womb throughout life, but we deny it. This morning I was appreciating the raisins I was eating as I had my cereal because somebody picked them in California. I'm dependent on that person. There's nothing that can lead me to feel totally independent. And that just enables a greater sense of connection to others. So those things are what has come out of the shadow. There's been a brighter light post-shadow for me by navigating it, by entering it.
Are there other spiritual opportunities that come to mind? I think you've spoken so eloquently about, both of you, about that there are spiritual opportunities inherent in growing older, of dealing with the grief and loss, but really appreciating what we have. Other kind of things that kind of resonate for either one of you about sort of part of what makes the spiritual opportunities of this passage, this age, so rich and wonderful?
Freedom.
I see a lot of people who are floundering post-career and going about it, I think, very wrong, because they think there's something wrong with them, and they're sitting there and they're looking for their way to make the contribution. And it's all externally generated, the same way we were when we were 20 and we had to go out and make a living and start our career, and we had to live up to expectations, and we had to, Bob just mentioned freedom, but I know that most of my life was not lived in freedom. Most of my life was lived in a sense of obligation and fear and responsibility. I felt like the whole process of getting a career started, raising a family, making a living, I found that there was just a lot of times when I had to make compromises with what I wish I really could do or be. And by the time time you get to be an older age and you suddenly hopefully you have some more time, if you let yourself have more time, if you're not so feeling so guilty and driven that you haven't just jumped right in because you're afraid to deal with the nothingness of that moment of passage. What the spirituality of age, the freedom that Bob is talking about, includes taking a long, extended period of time, or at least some time every day. Some of you still may be needing to work into older age, and I understand that. But as your obligations to family and other external things start to hopefully release their grip on you, if you can take that time and sit with nothingness and trust that if you start being a human being instead of a human doing, as Bob said, that eventually your spirit will start to fill up with something. Then you can re-enter the world. To me, the greatest gift is to have allowed myself. I sat by the river behind my house every day last summer, feeling guilty as heck that I wasn't writing. But I want to sit by that river to take advantage of the freedom of being the age that I am and sit there long enough until I could really see the river, not just as a backdrop for a barbecue, but to see every bird and every twig and everything. And it took me a whole summer of sitting out there for a couple of hours every day. And at the end of that summer, all of a sudden I had this urge to start writing again. But it didn't come out of, oh my God, I have this obligation to use my talents and skills to leave a legacy. It came out of, wow, I just saw 18 ducks swim into a circle. I want to tell somebody about that. So it's just a whole other way of being in the world, and you can't get there without going through that rough passage of letting go of the old and being in that unknown for a while.
So right. Yeah. Go ahead, Bob, and then I have a question.
Yeah, I'll just be very brief. One of you call to mind, Carol, one of my favorite poets whom a dear friend of mine introduced me to, thankfully, a number of years ago, Mary Oliver, and her great poem, The Summer Day. She's cavorting in these sand dunes around the Outer Cape in Massachusetts, and she's writing about the experience of a grasshopper landing in her hand and just enjoying that moment, watching its incredible insect eyes, the complexity of those eyes. And then she falls down in the sand and just feels this sense of wonder and awe, and she just is there, and she asks the person who's reading the poem, what else should I be doing? And then she poses the question to the reader. She says, so what is it you will do with your one wild and precious life? It is wild, it is precious, it is brief. It is very brief when you think about it, and no matter how many years you get. And what about right now, just taking this time and savoring whatever is stirring up in you that gives you a sense of joy or that gives you a sense of gratitude, and just letting, like a good glass of wine, take it in, look at all aspects of it, and appreciate it.
Jory, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to sort of integrate a question from one of the participants and get into a little bit of some of the questions that you have in the book, because I want to help bring the book a little bit more to people too, of recognizing how you've structured it and all. And Kendall from Arlington says, if thoughtful living is about living the question, how do I know if I'm holding the right question? Perhaps the question might be, what is the question I need to be living today? I thought that might be a perfect segue into...
She's on the right track.
5 questions. So I just thought it might be nice to introduce that question now and to have you talk about, and to respond to Kendall first, but also you raised 25 really profound questions, and I'd love you to share a little about maybe even how you came up with them, which for each of you, it's hard to pick one. For me, it would be hard to pick what question, but just what would you say is the most important question anyone concerned about aging needs to ask him or herself? So
I think Kendall's already asked it.
All right, I have an answer, and it's not even one of the 25 questions in the book, Bob. I don't know what you're going to do with me.
Okay.
I think the most important question that we have to ask ourselves is whether we think this is a loving universe or not, whether you call it God or divine presence or whatever. Are we here alone and living a brutal life and then we die and nothing happens to us, or is there some meaning and purpose to it and something that happens to us after life? Because I don't have the answer for you, and I think the reason this book is subtitled A Seeker's Guide rather than A Finder's Guide is because sometimes I think Bob and I think we know the answers to these questions, and I know that sometimes we waver. Who asked that question was Einstein and Carl Jung. They both asked that same question, so those are guys that I really respect, and it just changes the color of your life. I would not want to be aging without faith, personally, in something. Mm-hmm. And for me, it was a leap of faith. Actually, it wasn't so much a leap of faith as that I got pushed over a ledge. But when you're in free fall, it's a good time to ask, hey, is there anybody out there? Because I think that, honestly, without some sort of spiritual path, practice, or philosophy is beyond what I want to do. And I'm, as an academic with a critical thinking degree, I haven't always been popular for believing that there is a power greater than ourselves. But I just choose to live my life that way. And sometimes I think to myself, yeah, maybe I'm just imagining it or making it up as I go along. But then one of the big questions I ask myself is, what's the difference if it works for me? That's the first thing. The second thing, though, is that I think Bob and I, what we love to do is share miracle stories, because I think there's so often where we have taken a leap of faith and then things worked out better than we would have hoped for, maybe not the way we would have asked for them, but something came out of it, that some deeper wisdom or understanding. But you know what, before I turn it back over to Bob, because I know he'd like to talk about the structure of the book and the questions too, I want to say that we've given a lot of examples of enjoying the raisin this morning and the sand and the joy of the river and the ducks and everything. One of the things we challenged ourselves with this book was to ask ourselves, do we have a fair weather spirituality that's going to not be so delighted with the 13 ducks circling the first time something bad happens, or will our spirituality hold through cognitive impairment, physical pain, loss? A lot of our questions have to do with how can we hold our spiritual and psychological maturity in such a way that will help us to have the best chance of facing our own uncertainties, fears, and unknowns, and to figure out how can I appreciate my mother's bedpan? Is there anything to appreciate there? And you know what? Sometimes there isn't. Sometimes it's just having the freedom to know it's okay to yell at God or to grieve or to feel sad. We're not trying to we're doing the opposite of trying to get people to force themselves into a persona of I'm the happy old wise person, older person. That's not what we're trying to do. We're really trying to be whole people, and by that I say WHOLE, whole, to embrace all of it, the shadow and the light, and to find meaning even when we don't have meaning.
That's part of the power of what I've been resonating with reading it. But keep on, Bob. I know you have things to add about that.
It's funny you brought what you did, Carol, to the table a moment ago, because the book I've been reading lately is called Where the Hell is God? Now, as you mentioned, Dory, I was a Jesuit, and one of the sort of core perspectives that the Jesuits instilled in me is the effort to find God in all things. And again, for those for whom God language isn't necessarily palatable, finding something, that which is transcendent, something which goes beyond the concrete that you see, that you experience the life force, because that's really what it's about. It's about the life that permeates and passes through each of us. For me, I think one of the core questions in the book had to do with becoming yourself, really becoming yourself. I was taken years ago, God, it's almost 50 years ago now, with a passage from Thomas Merton, whom some of you may know, a monk. And he had said, we all have one vocation in life. And what does vocation mean? It means a call to be someone. He said, and that vocation is to be ourselves. And I think aging has helped me to get rid of that which is not myself, that which I accrued over time because I had to do it. My father wanted me to, society wanted me to. Those elements that we try to be someone we're not, and we essentially create a prison for ourselves. So I have had to grow beyond being who others expected me to be. And that's not an easy journey to take, because it's useful to have external corroboration of this is who you are. But when you have to plunge into yourself and get going to say, who am I really? Then maybe you discover within yourself that which is unique to you. And really there is, and you get rid of all of the accoutrements, the stuff that you thought was the car you've got, the partner who's hanging on your arm or whomever. Get rid of those. Michelangelo put it with a sculptor when asked, how do you create your great sculptures? He said, well, I just get rid of everything that's not the sculpture. I lop it off.
Can I keep my Prius? I like my Prius.
You can keep your Prius. You can keep your Prius. I'll keep my Subaru. Anyway, so what I want
metaphorically. You're speaking metaphorically.
What I want to encourage is people to appreciate their own prismatic qualities. And I'm a neologist. I love to come up with words that are new or different. And it's not just about the gifts you have, but it's about the way your life refracts the life you've lived, what your experience has been. And I think what we uniquely have to offer others is our experience of life. And we are like prisms, each of us a very distinct and unique prism. And every prism is unique and refracts the same light, but produces a spectrum that is in some way different from, and therefore unique, like each snowflake is unique. So I think, it really is about becoming yourself. And aging, you don't have to be the things that I used to be now. I can be more silly at times, more humorous. I can say no when I really want to say no, whereas previously I would have said yes because I thought I had to say yes. It's a time when you can be yourself. And that I think is one of the questions you have to ask. Who am I? Who do I want to be now that I'm at this stage of my life and I am freer to become myself?
Do you know Connie Goldman by any chance?
Oh, I do. She's wonderful. Yep.
Isn't she? Yeah, because she was at ASA. She's at that same conference, and she's been there every year.
Right.
So she's in her 80s now. She wrote a wonderful book called Who Am I Now That I'm Not Who I Used to Be?
Right. Yeah.
And I am very fortunate because she has mentored me. Prior to Bob, I met her at ASA, and I was a mess. By the time I met Bob, I was like a higher functioning mess. I was a true mess a couple of years before I met Bob because I had lost my job because of an age-related perception. I didn't like feeling invisible on streets and things like that. I was just having a real hard time with aging, despite a lifelong spiritual practice. And it really took me by surprise. And so when I went to see Connie for the first time, and she had just turned 80, she said to me, Carol, you have the opportunity, if you can embrace even how unhappy you are with the aging process, if you can embrace it all, you have the opportunity to not only grow old, but to grow whole. And I really got it because I think, and Bob, I know you would agree more than anybody that you've been able to embrace certain aspects of your past that you had disowned, and and also to reclaim certain aspects. So it's not like a knee-jerk reaction. I was this person, and now I was this whole fake person, and I'm going to be this whole real person. It's more complicated than that. It takes discernment, a lot of discernment.
It sure does. What do I want to let go of? What do I want to hold on to? What do I want to deepen?
And not respond to the allure of what society tells you should want to hang on to, but to truly discern, as you said, Dory, really discern what is the truth here, not what is the lie that I am encouraged to live. What is the truth?
So I want to integrate a couple of questions and then also get back to the book per se, but Ellie from Brookline says, I'm a literal person and it makes it hard to believe in something abstract like spirituality. Any suggestions?
She said she's a what?
Literal person.
Literal. A literal person. That means a very, would you say, left brain, rational, logical? I don't know. How do you feel about Einstein? Like I said, when I got my doctorate, I wanted to get my doctorate in religion so I actually went in there like a skeptic to have all these logical people disprove religion. But when you get down to the bottom of it, there is this ineffable something that you still can't explain. I can't get my head around infinity. I can't get my head around how many galaxies there are, how much life there be. There's just the mystery, I guess, is where it's at. And so I think would really encourage this caller to read some Einstein, some left brain thinkers who also came to the conclusion that there has to be some force for good. Otherwise, if there isn't some sort of force for good operating in the world, how the heck are we still here? That's the big question I wouldn't been able to answer. How come we haven't been destroyed by nuclear blast a million times over? And I don't know, so that's that leap of faith we were talking about.
Yeah, let me spring in here, too. And I think in addition to reading those people whom you recommended, Carol, I would suggest that Sally read herself. I would suggest that you look at, when you say,
wise one.
I'm a literal person. Look at all the doubts that come up when you're faced with, how can I believe? I've had a friend who once said to me about spirituality, how can you believe that crap? And what was interesting, we're friends, we will be from when we met till the end. And I said, I do. And what was interesting, after he attended an event I did, which had to do with spirituality in psychotherapeutic context, he said, thanks for doing that. I said, thanks for doing what? He said, for that presentation you gave a couple of weeks ago. I said, really? He said, yeah. He said, and I realized something. I said, well, what did you realize? He said, I'm not an atheist. I'm an agnostic. Now, I wasn't looking to have him shift away from his position, but I think what happened was our relationship encouraged his willingness to grapple with even his own questioning and doubting and his cynicism. So I think we need to embrace our doubts and cynicism too and get to know them. How did I get here? Why did I get here? Not that it's going to change your position, nor is that the goal of doing so, but it's really getting to know what gives you more life or what gives you less life. If that gives you more life, stay with it. That's the thing, I think, is to discern, to use your word again, Dory, discern.
Well, I think it was actually Carol's word, but that's okay.
Yeah, but that's all right. He never gives me credit.
She's very discerning also.
You better say that now.
Ooh, it's true. Yet another
Carlene from Hawaii has a comment. She says, as advised in the Gospel of St. Thomas, I try to bring forth what is within me at every stage of life. There's always something to do, something to give, something to work for. Is this enough of a spiritual journey for others? I wonder, ... So she's wondering.
Yeah.
Is that, and I guess she's wondering, is this a little of what you're talking about?
I think it is. I think if you can, that's you being a prismatic, that's bringing forth yourself, the best of what you are, the life within you. And that is what better thing can we have to offer. And I think for me, and maybe for Carol too, not maybe, I think certainly, our writing this book was really a felt need, a deep inner sense of wanting to put into words some of what our experience is. And when I look at the book and read what I've written sometimes, I think, who wrote that? It's as if something, and Dory and I had a conversation once, and she said, that's like channeling, isn't it? I said, it is. It's channeling life as it has passed through me. So I think, Carlene, let the life that passes through you reach out and touch others as well. Why not?
And she does, knowing this person.
A
question
aloha.
that leads... Another question from Nancy from Washington, which I think leads into sort of a little bit about your book, which is, there's several great books out there on spirituality of aging. What differentiates your book from others?
I'm sorry. I'm just going to start.
Jump in.
I'm going to toot our horn just a little bit. I don't know if your listeners know Gail Sheehy. She wrote the book Passages.
Right? I think probably many do, but share what she said.
Yes.
Yeah.
She said, I don't know, this is a qualitative rather than quantitative, but she said, this is the best book I've ever read on this most significant passage. I guess what I'm trying to say with that is that there are, one of the things that we did, and that's really important to us in our book, is that we have an incredible bibliography where we actually talk about many books, and probably some that this listener is citing. So we are the last to say that we were the first, because we benefited from our mentors and so much.
Yeah.
What this book does, though, that no other book does, and if I'm wrong, you can correct me, but most spirituality and aging books are written from a particular spiritual perspective. So there's an amazing book on Buddhism and spirituality. There's some great books on Judaism and spirituality and aging. There's some wonderful books on Christianity or a Catholic point of view on spirituality and aging. Bob and I, being part of the boomer generation, and this book is very much a next generation generation book, because a lot of spirituality and aging books were also written by our mentors, people older than us. But what this book does is it puts two boomers in dialogue who come from different spiritual and psychological orientations. We're different genders as well, and plus I have kids and grandkids, Bob doesn't, so we have a lot of differences between us. And what we have heard from people, and I think the reason that Gail Sheehy resonated so strongly, is that in the dialogue between Bob and me, in which we explore the differences and sometimes just answer these questions differently, it opens up a lot of space for everybody of every gender, spiritual persuasion, career, or whatever, to say, okay, now what do you think? So it's the tone of the book is much less experts preaching than it is a great dialogue between a bunch of aging boomers who are well educated and trying to figure it out together as we go.
Mm-hmm. And that really comes across. This is Dora. I just want to say, that, just from my viewpoint, it really comes across that they're in the journey that we're all in, and so that the appreciation of the struggles and the life events that each of them have experienced, and what the wake-up calls and what resonated for them and where the doubts were, it really, when you're open to it, and if you are, and it doesn't mean you have to go through all the questions, but it's inviting you to ask the questions and be a seeker. I mean, it really does. So that's my 2 cents worth. But anyway, go ahead, Bob.
And to be filled with wonder. The French expression for wonder is I wonder, je me demande. It also means I ask myself. So we're inviting people to wonder, return almost to a state of kidlikeness, where you look at life not with the jaded perspective that often gets instilled over time, and as you get older, crotchety old person, but open yourself up to a childlikeness again. And I love Harvey Cox, who was one of our endorsers, and the recent Harvard Divinity Bulletin has a picture of him on the back, and he's dressed in his academic robes, white-haired, glasses, looking marvelous, and he's just saying, make trouble. Make trouble. Meaning, let the word get out, which is what we're trying to do in a way. We're trying to make trouble to stir people up. And Harvey said, at last, a book about aging that does not envision it as a problem to be solved or even a challenge to be overcome. It greets growing older as a gift and an opportunity. With age comes at least a little wisdom, and that wisdom is relevant for people at any age cohort. So recommend this to the 20-year-old, too. I savored this fine volume and commend it to anyone still searching, as I hope we all are, for the fullness of life.
We're out of time, I think, Bob, almost. So I'd like to don't want to leave, because remember at the very beginning I asked a question of everybody?
Yes, please do, and then I'm going to give the book away, too, and then we'll do a little takeaway for each of you. So go ahead back to the first question. Yep.
Okay, this is going to be really quick. So the woman on the park bench, depending on how you felt about looking at her, first of all, I want you to imagine that it's me, because I do sit on park benches now, and I'm often in raggedy jeans, and I'm also looking off into space with this blank look on my face. So answer D, after you get through the pity, after you get through denying this woman, after you get through trying to give her a makeover, what she is actually having is a transcendent experience. So the answer was D. So I just thought I would share it with you before we say goodbye.
But that really does speak to the biases and stereotypes that we all, as we're aging, carry with us about aging. This has been wonderful, and I wish we could go on and on, because, of course, I have a whole bunch of questions about as we really get older and dealing with all the denial that many people have about, you've spoken about it, but we're not, some of us aren't there yet to know what that stage will be like. So maybe we can revisit this at another point. But this has been wonderful. But I'd like each of you to just, what's the greatest learning you'd like to share and have people take with them as they leave this call?
Go ahead, Bob.
So many. I think one of the things I've learned as I've gotten older is how to not let shame get the better of me. Shame is that emotion which will drive you into isolation, whatever it is you're ashamed of. And I am good and I am bad and I am ugly. I'm all of the above. And do I therefore allow my shame about my ugliness or my badness drive me into isolation? Shame is a bit like mildew. It does very well in the dark. But if you bring it out into the open, it cannot thrive. It's stopped. And I think that it's in the book if people want to read it. There's a story about my 40-year experience with a shameful episode that got resolved at a certain juncture, and it was a powerful learning moment for me. So I think that's probably the main thing, because I think freedom from shame gives you incredible freedom in life. Incredible freedom in life. And I just want to put this in too, just for those who may be still wondering, is the book worth the buy? Go to our website, www.spiritualityofage.com. And there's a lot of information there. You can find out a lot about the book right there, including excerpts, and see if you think it's going to be worth your while. Carol.
Oh my gosh. I'll just say one really quick thing, which is I think the most important thing that I learned as a result of working with Bob on this book is to not tell unnecessary stories about life that scare me. I think we all spend a lot of time worrying about the future or giving the worst interpretations to the things that are happening to us. And so to live in the questions, to let air and freedom blow into our life experience so that we're not so quick to conclude that we were wrong or that bad things are happening to us or that aging is a terrible thing to be avoided at all costs. There's just a lot of fresh air and freedom, joy in this process, including this interview. So I want to thank you so much for doing this and having so many listeners. That's extraordinary what you've been able to accomplish here. And I can tell by their questions that they're a really cool bunch. So this has just been a delight.
And yes, and I thank you too, Dory, and I thank all those who have joined us today.
Thank you, the both of you, so much. And there have been some comments from people, from Meg, Maura, some others, saying your synergy is wonderful, your wisdom is terrific, great presentation. So people have really been enjoying it. So thank you, and enjoy the launching of this wonderful book. It's very special. I do encourage people to read it, but see what you think about it. Take care. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio with Dr. Dorian Mintzer. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show, listen to past episodes, or download our free retirement transition guide, visit revolutionizeyourretirementradio.com.